This is Lisa Harnish with Certification Partners. I'm here today with Dr. James Stanger for the latest in our CIW webinar series, Real Life Computing and Teaching with Virtualization. Hello, James. How are you today?
Doing great, Lisa. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. We've got a cast of characters here. Besides Lisa and myself, of course, we have Stephen Schneider calling in. How you doing, Stephen?
Good morning, James. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Great. And we also have Todd Hopkins. Stephen is our certification specialist. Todd Hopkins works with CIW here as our creator of our products. So welcome, Todd. How you doing?
Doing very well. Thanks, James.
Great. And we also have a special guest star, Art Payne, from a company called CipherPath. How you doing, Art?
Good morning, James. Doing great. Thank you.
And we're all here in Phoenix, except for Art. He's our odd man out here, and he's in Richmond, Virginia. So everybody, we're going to be talking about virtualization in the classroom, and I'm glad you're all here, probably from all parts of the world here, because we get a lot of people from Europe and elsewhere. So everybody, welcome. Today's agenda, we're going to be talking about some of the basics of virtualization, because I think that there are a lot of folks out there who've heard this term but need to get some definitive information. And so Stephen, Todd, and Art are all experts in virtualization. And I say this because, for example, Art over at CipherPath does some terrific work creating entire virtual networks to model threats and to discuss model security threats and to show exactly how entire networks work. And they use virtualization as a classroom tool. It's a very exciting thing. Stephen Schneider, over the years, has used virtualization in the classroom, also in developing courseware. Todd Hopkins has helped create, was absolutely instrumental in creating, for those of you who know CIW, our CIW product, Live Labs, which is a virtual lab environment that instead of having to worry about setting up your classroom, all you have to do is grab a web browser and a pipe and a bunch of a virtual series of labs. A sandbox environment is waiting for you. So we're going to talk about in this agenda here how virtualization works, major players out there, and then practical uses of virtualization in the classroom, in the industry, in your personal lives. So that's the agenda, folks. For those of you who don't know who we are CIW. We are your web and internet certification. We focus on skills. We provide a holistic approach to certification, which means we provide courses and certification exams for career and college prep. We focus on internet skills, video creation, SEO, social media, and from CIW Foundations, our first product, all the way through, we focus on putting people on a lifelong learning path, not a vendor's product treadmill. We're vendor neutral, which every once in a while we get people to say, well, what do you mean vendor neutral? Well, we focus on the best vendor applications. They could come from open source. They could come from Microsoft. Doesn't matter, because we focus on competencies and job roles, and that way we educate people about the tools to use. As a result, we're globally accepted with approaching 70,000 individuals who are certified, ready for today's IT environment. Again, we focus on providing from CIW Foundations all the way up the pyramid, as it were, to security certifications such as CISSP, where we map right from IT managers all the way to IT executives. I'm James Stanger. I'm President and Chief Certification Architect of the outfit, and Stephen, Todd, and Art are here to tell us more about how to use virtualization and the important part of it. So let's get started and talk about what virtualization is anyway. And this is where, Stephen, I think I'm going to tap you for a second. Let's, you and I, talk a bit about Virtualization 101. To me, virtualization is where you kind of run an instance of a resource, such as an entire operating system, inside the memory of a computer. So it's kind of like we've all launched Microsoft Word, okay, or we've launched a browser, Chrome web browser. Imagine double-clicking on something, and instead of it launching an application, you can launch an entire operating system from your Windows desktop or from your Macintosh desktop, or if you're weird like me, a Linux desktop. Stephen, that's my definition. Is that any good? Does that work?
James, it works for me. That's a really good analogy of being able to use virtualization. Virtualization allows us to do a lot of things, from business and also the classroom, of being able to consolidate machines, take a look at different operating systems, to run legacy applications in a stable environment, prolonged life of archaic architecture, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it allows us to save energy and better use of our resources, so to speak, in a confined area. So it really is a way that industry is looking at handling their server closets, so to speak.
You bring up one thing in Art, if you want to kick in any things to add here. But one thing I want to talk about, Stephen, is you mentioned that it helps use resources more wisely. I think one reason it does is because 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you wanted a new server, you would actually get a new physical system and you'd put it up in the server rack, plug it in, and then you had a new, as I always say, a new space heater. You added more heat to your data center because those servers are far more heavy duty than that notebook computer or tablet or even desktop system that you're used to using. Those things generate a tremendous amount of heat and they suck a lot of juice. With virtualization, you can now use one server as long as you have enough RAM in there, and you can launch dozens, if you have enough RAM, of virtual systems that are running off of that one hardware server. That saves power and that saves heat. And I think heat's the big thing because now you have a data center that doesn't have to have that HVAC system to blow in all that cool air. We all know how air conditioning is very expensive here in Arizona.
That's definitely that's fair enough, James. That's one really big point is going greener. Having a greener IT department, reducing cost in the physical hardware, but then also in the resources that's required to keep that hardware running. Redundancy is another big factor that goes right along with that, because in your data center you would buy a physical server to go along with it, but then what do you do for disaster recovery? You'd have some sort of redundant system so that if something happened you could bring the thing back online quickly. Now in virtualization we can do that virtually and have just re-image a new server if something were to happen. So there's definitely a lot of benefits. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. The other thing that the virtualization does is you talk about that redundancy is it also minimizes the downtime because you can have these machines running. You can have a physical server running and then you're running the virtualization of it, and one of your images goes down that people are running within a matter of minutes. You've got your machine back up and running because you've got your redundancy going. You've got this other virtual machine, and it comes right back up, so your users are not without their systems.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys. That's absolutely right. Art, do you have anything particularly to add to that discussion of the benefits of virtualization?
Sure. Just one example where we've run into some organizations who it's become so expensive to maintain the network systems, the investment that they've made, using the example of like the Golden Gate Bridge, the amount of expense that went into building this giant infrastructure to really do one thing, move people from one point to another, versus say a more of a mobile type bridge that you can put together, take apart, a lot less expensive, a lot more flexible. These networks have become difficult to procure and maintain, and virtualization really allows you to reduce that footprint and create a lot more flexibility, which both Stephen and Todd reflected in their comments. So,
right. 10 years ago, I was, maybe 13 years ago, I was at a show that no longer exists called Linux World, and there I remember watching IBM. They pulled out a mainframe, big old mainframe, and I watched them. They were on their 132nd operating system, Linux operating system, that they were able to virtualize. And I sat there for about maybe a minute, 30 seconds or so, and watched about 4 or 5 operating systems, full-blown Linux operating systems, running web servers, running database servers, popping up there. It was impressive to see something like that happen. And imagine if you folks need to scale your presence, up or down, right, in terms of more web servers or more database servers, what have you. Instead of having to have somebody physically trundle in a physical system, they can effectively, by double-clicking a few things, provision an entire system. They can launch entire platforms for backup, as Stephen suggested, recovering from attacks, scale a network to need, and you can virtualize storage, processing, various applications, anything you wish. So I think, guys, we've done a pretty good job with that. Virtualization is useful from a classroom setup, and this is where Art, I think, and Stephen, you can talk about some things that virtualization can help when you're doing a lab setup. I think we all know what it means to share a lab. A lot of times sharing a lab means that the previous work you did as a class gets erased, okay, or you can't get back into that classroom. How, folks, can virtualization help? And Todd, feel free to kick in if you want. I think I just want to set the stage for ways that you can re-image your classroom quickly and that sort of thing.
Well, I'll go just real quick. I remember going to school and working with some professors, and they said, well, we need to go in and, we got to reconfigure this entire lab, and so you're spending, 6 hours at night so that the class in the morning will have the new applications and operating systems on their machine in the morning, and, it was, or you go out and swap in a new hard drive that you've reconfigured and that type of thing, and that was just such a pain. And then, but virtualizing the classroom in this way, the student logs in, and wherever they are in the class, they've got their system right there, ready to go. They don't even have to go to the lab anymore. They can log in from home. They can log in from, a hotel room if they happen to be traveling, and get to that material, get to that lab, get to those assignments that they need to do, and accomplish that task because that system they needed to connect to is virtualized. And with what Art has, now we're talking about virtualizing entire environments, not just a particular system, but it really helps to give that student a hands-on experience without having to, go through days and weeks and months of trying to configure it so that they can actually do it, an hour-long lab.
There are providers out there, HatSize and ToolWire, and of course CipherPass, that's able to do it. And we've, through our live labs, have been able to do that. Back, I remember the first time I virtualized, we were using something provided by VMware. They're one of the big names, of course, out there. They kind of pioneered it. I suppose you could say what Cisco is to a router, VMware at least has been to virtualization. I don't know if that's fair enough, Art or Stephen, to say. But I remember one of the first times I ever used virtualization was back around 2000, and I taught a bunch of courses for IBM. And at the end of it, we finished, we started with an image, a virtualized image, and we were able to blow it from some servers and then put it onto the system. And within about an hour and a half, we had fully working systems in the lab. And it was really neat because usually it would take you a full day to set up all those labs. And then at the end of the class, after all the students had done their work, guess what we did? We re-imaged those systems, and we had all of the students' work captured. So now we had a beginning, and we even did it in the middle of the class, an end kind of understanding of, we had 3 images so that we had a good idea about how the students progressed through the course. So we had all of these images saved so we could show people student progress. It was pretty exciting stuff. Nowadays, though, you don't have to do virtualization yourself. You can do it. Oh, wrong slide. You can do it. You can have people do it yourselves, and that's why what we've done with CIW is we've worked with people such as CipherPass and others to create solutions so that you don't even have to virtualize yourself. Let's go back to these major players here on this slide. Do you have any other players that you guys would want to add here? So there's virtualization environments that you can grab. There's VMware, Hypervisor, VirtualBox. Who else would you add here? Anybody?
Oh, just throw in that Microsoft has their own set of players too. If you're just working on virtualizing Microsoft products, they've got a line of tools that are in there. But as far as being just desktop virtualization applications, for instance, like a classroom or something like that, you've hit probably the broadest range. And then, of course, the cloud-based providers.
Yeah, and we definitely should put CypherPath in there. It's a big one. I wanted to show people, kind of where we are in terms of virtualization and new technologies. We all talk about, if you remember, the cloud was a new topic. I remember when virtualization was a new topic. I think we're certainly past the idea where it's a new idea and people are, it's a trigger for discussion, or people get disillusioned with virtualization because it doesn't do everything. Every technology, I think, goes through this kind of curve. Virtualization is certainly with us. It's here to stay, and it's something that is used in many ways. One of the things that has been happening, though, and this is something that I think, Art, I'd like to tap you a bit for, is one of the technologies that is associated with virtualization is software-defined networking, SDN. And this is basically where you can use technologies and procedures to separate control and functionality from traffic. This is a way that we all have heard of routers, or at least most of us, I think, have heard of routers and how they work. Imagine controlling routers and switches not so much from their individual interfaces. You have to log into a switch and then control it, and then log out, and then log back into a router. You can actually control all of those systems from one central console, and you can do it from a way in which multiple vendor systems can all work and play well together under one single controller, a software controller. You use technologies such as OpenFlow and XVLAN, and there are others. Art, I've gone very quickly over the concept of software-defined networking, and I wanted to make sure I introduced it here because your product that you're able to work with in the classroom is able to create entire network environments. The virtualization folks, you can, and putting it in the cloud, it's easy enough to set up an operating system, has all the software ready to go, and then you can virtualize it and launch it for 25 students or 250 or 250,000 students. But what you're doing, Art, is using software-defined networking. You have the ability with your company to launch entire virtualized platforms and entire virtualized networks. Is that about right?
Right. We're using a combination of technology. We're using software-defined networking, the provisioning side with virtualization, and then adding in our own unique IP to do behavioral virtualization, which allows us to control not only the hardware and software, but the behaviors of all the assets, including human in the loop and hardware in the loop. So we can plug human activity in, both real and let's just say an avatar version of a human, and those behaviors, and also hardware. We can plug unique hardware into the software topology. So it allows us to create the entire environment and spin it up very rapidly, so we get a production, not a simulation, a real production network that can be operationally realistic, and that's what our clients at least are looking for.
Okay, so interesting stuff. I think when it comes to this environment with software-defined networking, we basically are able to do is to create two kinds of planes. That's the term they use. And when it comes to software-defined networking, they're able to basically control and handle and configure the bytes. That's the first plane. And the second one is actually where you're able to have a second plane where the traffic gets controlled. And by separating those two rough divisions, now instead of saying, okay, I'm going to learn how to use a Cisco interface, or I'm going to learn how to use what HP does, or other Juniper networks, instead of worrying about that, you learn one control interface, and that's how you handle and configure the actual routers themselves or switches. And then you can create entire planes that control how all of the forwarding, how all the packets go. Common terms when it comes to software-defined networking are decoupling. For example, what they'll say is that the way to control the router or the switch is decoupled from the hardware. So in a sense, it's taking virtualization to the next step. And you can create sophisticated, instantly scalable networks. And you can engage in, and what they do at CypherPass, for example, is network modeling, where you can model entire bits of network traffic, and you can show how security attacks work. And from that's in the classroom. From a real-life perspective, you can even create entire networks for use in production environments. Is that fair enough to say, Art, or did I just step into the world of science fiction there?
No, that was very nicely done.
Okay, well, who knew? Who knew? Thank you very much. Now, before we go on, there are a few people that have been asking a few questions that are really quite relevant here, and it has to do, for example, how will a student be able to continue working at home with their home computer with a virtualization system that's been set up in a local school class? That's a really good question. Again, there are two ways to go about doing virtualization, folks. One, you could do it yourself and set it up in a classroom, and you have a virtualization server going, and then it stores images, and then you can either blow those images. I say blow. You can transfer those images onto systems in the lab. That's kind of the old way of doing it, if you ask me. People do it all the time, and if they want to make it local, that's great. I think the better way to do it is to ask yourself, do I want to be, as an instructor, a virtualization manager, or should I allow somebody else to do it? And I think, Todd, if you want, maybe you can explain, maybe with Stephen, about with virtualization and live labs, how we take that burden away from the instructor, and we make it so that students can access virtualized environments from their homes.
Sure, yeah. Coming up with the live labs, it was an interesting process and experience. We've gone with a couple different providers for those live labs over the years, and some of the issues that come up with this is some of our courses have kind of a challenging setup that needs to take place so that the students can experience the various software applications that might be profiled, or learn how to run an e-commerce server and those types of things. So some of those types of things can be a bit challenging, and an instructor has to work with the IT people at their school and try to get things done, and oh, this isn't allowed, or that isn't allowed, or oh, we have this and not that application. So there were some issues with that, and what we wanted to do is come up with a solution that allowed individuals, whether they're in a classroom or they might be, in an online type of environment, online class, where they're not sitting in front of that instructor, kind of a remote class that's going on. And so as we looked at this, the virtualization gave us a great opportunity, because we can put that up in the cloud. We can put those images, the virtualized systems up in the cloud, and a student can log in through our online portal, through our LMS, through CIW Online, and launch these systems wherever they are. And what that does, James, as you were talking about earlier, is it takes the burden of setting up all those systems and making sure that they're installed correctly. It allows you to plug the student into it instantly. It's already set up and organized, ready for the student to go in and start in whatever lab that they're working in, whether it's running a Dreamweaver application, running to create a website, whether they need to run an open source application that somebody's now updated and it's not quite functioning the same way, and where it is. So it takes a lot of those challenges away, because the system's already set up. It's a matter of log into a browser, launch the live lab, and then you are running that machine. You are in complete control of that machine. You're able to, in some of our courses, go in and, you know what, I need to look at the IP address. I need to change these things. I need to look at those types of things and modify various aspects. So that is a wonderful thing, because it doesn't matter where the student is. And it doesn't matter that the particular school doesn't have the ability to allow a student to log in from their home to the school systems. So this takes a lot of those challenges away and roadblocks away to get the students working in some of those labs wherever they may be.
It's a great way to put it. Oh, go ahead, Stephen. Go ahead.
I'll just throw in as long as we have bandwidth. If we're remote and logging in, obviously you need a good internet connection to be able to tap in and use cloud-based or web-based applications or resources. And that's basically what our virtual environment becomes when we're doing it that way. Is we're using a cloud-based service, cloud-based application. And the other thing I was going to throw in here, and I see somebody's already made a comment about this in the text box, about facilitating distance learning, and this really provides a great resource for an instructor of a distance learning course, because as Todd, you were just mentioning, what we're doing through live labs or virtual labs is we're providing a standardized platform for students to participate in, and I found this of great use with the distance learning classes that I facilitate, in that you're no longer really having to worry too much about, if I'm teaching a web design class, what version of the web design application is someone using, and what are the differences that they may be experiencing, or what if they're in a Mac environment, or what if they're in Windows environment or Linux environment. You're taking out a lot of hot question spots by being able to place everyone in a standardized platform with the same operating system, the same version, the same tools that you want to implement or have the students work through in your course, and them being able to have those resources readily available no matter where they are.
It's a great way to put it, Stephen. Working with CipherPath earlier this year, I was able to, via distance learning education, teach a bunch of folks. Most of the folks were based on the Eastern Seaboard and really in the Maryland, Washington, D.C. area. But I was in Olympia, Washington. I was able to teach them and aim them towards virtual labs. And the virtual labs were basically, like I said, a sandbox environment where even though you had your web browser going, all you had to do was log in, and systems were waiting there that had labs ready to go, that had software preloaded, and these instructors over the summer and throughout the class were able to log in no matter where they were from their school classroom. Great. If they were at home, if they were on vacation somewhere, they could access it. There's a story there, and I think, Stephen, you've been able, through our CIW Live Labs, have been able to show people how distance learning works. We have many customers, for example, many individuals, CIW customers, or people who are getting certified, who use our self-study kits, which offer live labs as well. So great, I wanted to address that question. So thank you very much, Stephen. You saw the same question there. Going back to the slide deck real quick. So imagine with software-defined networking, you can use routers as you wish rather than as a vendor intent. So you can get very creative with how you create networks, route packets, how you can automate procedures. This program called OpenFlow, and you can, if you Google for it, you'll see OpenFlow. It's meant to create a standard interface that people can use, including CipherPath. And it's able to layer things out. I think many of you might know about the OSIRM, the 7-layer model. In a sense, what software-defined networking, and this is an image I stole here from opennetworking.org. They're the people who created software-defined networking as a concept, anyway. They layer the control out to the application, to the control, and the infrastructure layer. So the infrastructure layer is the actual physical device. The control layer is the interface that you use, okay, to route the packets, and then the application layer is basically defines the software that you're going to use. So there's a lot more efficiency, a lot more agility that can, you can make things a lot more agile. In a sense, what Art can do with his product is launch entire networks, quite rapidly, and it's a very exciting piece of technology. So there's a lot of players out there. The Open Networking Foundation, Cisco, of course, has begun to adopt it. When, as usual with a new technology, virtualization was seen for years as, oh, that's going to kill all hardware. Well, it really didn't. SDN was said, oh, it's going to become the Cisco killer because people won't need Cisco anymore. No, it's just something that I think all of the networking providers will adapt to and use. And of course, CipherPath with their CyberFire product makes it possible to do this. Just for a couple of minutes, why don't you tell us a bit more about the CyberFire product and some of the things you're able to do. And by the way, folks, we have a white paper that will be available at the end of this webinar in addition to this slide deck. But tell us a bit more, Art, about what CyberFire is able to do.
Sure. I think Stephen hit on it earlier when he was talking about, I think it was Stephen that had talked about trying to build these networks and going through the procurement process, just the hardware footprint that's, that gets into play, the cost, the inflexibility of hardware systems. And so the product that we came out with was designed around using those, using software-defined networking. And at the end of the day, what we wanted to be able to do was replicate this, these network topologies as quickly as possible and allow you to do it all in software. So you really, and the best example I can give you is we took a DoD customer who had thousands of assets, 6 different networks, who were spending millions of dollars in hardware and people time, if you will, to maintain those systems. And we were able to, through virtualization, get that down to one blade server to be managed, and then they use it as a training and exercise type of environment, and then you can bring in your content and behaviors and other things based on, you know, the types of use cases that were specific to those customers. So that's the, you know, we're really a software company creating a capability, and with some unique IP allowing further reduction of even the memory use. A typical virtual machine will still have to use the same amount of memory that's used in the system they're replicating, whereas we've even pushed that envelope to reduce the amount of memory that's used, so you can stand up extremely large scale, massive scale systems and network scenarios and topologies using a fraction of the memory, and that's another cost savings and scalable capability. And you know, we're moving towards provisioning and also modeling and simulation. So we're getting involved in the modeling and simulation. So those are the types of things that we're focused on for both commercial, education, and even government.
Yeah, so what you're able to do then is you're able to use all sorts of technologies. I'm not saying you're using Citrix Cloud Bridge or what have you, but you're able to use all sorts of technologies and software to create environments so that instead of instructors saying, well, a firewall does this or a switch does that, and here's what you can do, they can actually fire up an entire you know, network and show how that works. So I find it's a very intriguing
Sure.
intriguing sort of thing. And you can experiment, because if something goes wrong, right, if a student misconfigures a router or does whatever, what's the solution, guys? All you have to do is re-image that particular classroom or re-image that particular environment, and the student can go back to a previous set. So you have basically kind of, there's no penalty to the experimentation that you have. That was really very much operative in the classroom even now. You guys know what I'm trying to say? You can experiment much more freely.
Well, if you are using malware, you don't have leakage in the virtual world that affects a production network or other systems, and that's always beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I think is really neat, especially in the classroom with this virtualization and the environment virtualization that CyberPath has, is exactly, the student has hands-on experience managing networks, and without causing, you know, serious repercussions throughout an organization when you can virtualize an environment like CyberPath can.
We're a really big fan of hands-on work at CIW. Our courseware focuses on getting hands-on experience. If students, if that's beyond the student, we bring in, have the instructor do instructor-led labs. There are many ways to do it. But the neat thing about virtualization in the classroom, I remember dual booting for years. You don't have to do that if you have virtualization going. There are a lot of really things that you can do that you don't have to install from scratch or anything like that. So Live Labs, again, is an example of virtualization. We offer that in our self-study kits. We offer that in our instructor-led training as well. And you can bring in other operating systems, other versions of Windows. If you want to show XP and you're on a Windows 8 system, you can virtualize Linux. I didn't put Macintosh in there, but you could, I'm sure, run that as well. When I say Mac, I mean Apple systems. So you can also show different states of operating systems, web servers and databases. You can do security forensics examples. You can show completed student work if you want to show an entire class. Look, here's the goal. Get there yourself. And that's something so you can store that as an instructor for later. Pretty exciting stuff. So virtualization and instructors. Stephen, I'm going to put you on the spot, or Art, I'm going to put you on the spot because what kinds of things are, virtualization, we've talked about all the great things that it solves. What are some of the challenges that instructors can have with virtualization?
What type of challenges they have as far as implementing virtualization,
Yeah.
James, or?
Yeah. What kinds of problems have instructors have with it? Just understanding it, for example, or what are some of the common things that people do with virtualization in the classroom? It's another way to put it.
Well, one of the most common things that we do with it in the classroom, as kind of what I mentioned before, as far as working with remote students, is standardization. But inside the classroom, and I think a teacher even commented, that their IT department allows them to use a virtual environment within the classroom, is it provides the need or provides a service for being able to do your work on a system, virtual environment, without screwing up another class's environment. I think we were chatting yesterday about back in the day, when I'd go to a learning center or something like that, the first thing we'd have to do is swap out the hard drives so we weren't messing up another class's working environment for our networking class that we were doing. And that was always a major hassle. But now with virtual environments, you've got more flexibility in doing that. We can go in and create our own networks in our virtual environment without having to mess up or touch somebody else's environment. And you're able to save your work too. I know a lot of schools, they'll come in and they'll wipe all of the systems every night. So you come in and the next morning, turn your computers on, and anything that you had been doing the previous day is gone from that environment. Virtualization allows us to work around that because everyone could have their own virtual environment that's assigned to them for a particular class that they could be working with. Art, I'll pass the ball back over to you.
Yep. Well, I think from a caveat point of view, and this is just the way things are today, but what we've found is when you're virtualizing something, you can't get away from still having to have a license. So if you virtualize a Microsoft system or some other, especially if you've already covered it under your production system, you still have to cover that licensing in the virtual world. And larger firms that have site license agreements, that's not a big deal. But if you're a small group, you have to take that into consideration that there could be some additional costs. But typically, the savings of the hardware alone and the time offset those types of costs. But you just can't ignore that, in the plan.
That's great. Great point. I think one of the caveats, too, when it comes to if you run your own virtualization, I prefer having somebody else do it. That's why we have it in live labs. That's why we work with CypherPath. But one of the caveats, I think, and brought up here, I think by one of our participants, is that you need a lot of RAM in order to run virtualization well yourself. And by a lot, I mean more than you want to put in your system. For each image, you'll need, I would say, a good couple of gig more, probably even 4 to 6 gig more. You need a tremendous amount of RAM. Also, if you have a low-quality video card, that can also cause problems for you. And the answer is that you'll have to bang in a better card. If you're using virtualization through a web browser, like what we frankly prefer, usually those issues are non-existent. So I just wanted to come up with, if you do your own versus having somebody else provide it. And by the way, when you have virtualization, you can't just use an operating system if you don't have a license for it. With Linux, you don't have to worry about it. But if you're using Windows systems, virtualization, you have to license those systems. Okay, it's not something that allows you to break copyright or anything like that.
Right, and Art brought up a really good point in that, and that's for everything, James. Even for Apple, you have to have the licensed versions of the operating system. If you're in Microsoft land and you're running Microsoft servers in virtual environment, you have to have the licenses for those servers as well.
Absolutely. And again, more RAM, I'd say 20% more than required by original system at least. Again, where are you going to store your images, I think, is another issue to think about. So with CIW Live Labs, you don't have to worry about that so much. And Todd's already, I think, talked amply about how that works. So we kind of do it for you. And with CIW Live Labs and working with CipherPath, we're looking to expand on that kind of activity. So all you need is a web browser and a pipe, and you can still get that hands-on experience without a lot of the hassle. So with CyberFire, again, we've already talked about this, but you can go beyond mere virtualized desktops and software and virtualize and model entire networks. Stephen, over the years, our CIW Network Technology Associate Program, we have a lot of real hotshot CIW instructors who do a great job teaching that. We also have a lot of people who can struggle at teaching people how to understand these technologies. That's going to be less of an issue now that we can actually show in real time how each of these devices work. To me, it's a very exciting thing. And from the security perspective, with the possibility of working with our CIW security course, where we can show how threats work and model them and recreate network issues and also show how backup works. So there are a lot of different ways in which these technologies work. So I just wanted to bring it out there, showing some of the possibilities that virtualization makes that classroom come alive.
Sure, James, and I think Art's already addressed part of that with some great examples. But even the ability to go in and configure firewalls and implement some sort of an attack on a network, and then to view what happens in that in real time is a great experience for students to be able to do. And virtualization provides you the ability to do that.
One thing that I wanted to do in order, and basically I want to open this webinar up to questions pretty soon, but I want to show people a couple of resources that will help people understand more about how schools can use the desktop in a smart way. Again, we can talk about how virtualization solves all problems, but of course, every solution has its own challenges, right? So there's some resources that you'll be able to access once you download the PDF here of this PowerPoint slide. There's some resources that talk about how schools save with desktop virtualization, and there's some overviews about how virtualization is used throughout. We talked about software-defined networking. There's a pretty good URL there that gives a nice overview of those as well. And then finally, you can go to cypherpath.com. And by the way, when you when you receive the thank you for attending this webinar, you'll see a URL, and in that URL you can download this. If you follow it, you can download this webinar and also a white paper that Art has made available to discuss more about how his solution works. You can also have a nice URL talking about 20 virtualization providers and what they do. Even though you, as a participant, may not be interested in virtualizing, dozens of systems yourself, it's a very good overview of how virtualization works and how the market is operating today. So what kind of questions do you have? If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat window. We've tried, as we usually do, to answer any questions. Is CyberFire something from freeware? Baha Tony is asking. CyberFire is a software as a service model. That's one way to describe it. And so it's something that is used, is done on a pay-as-you-go basis. Art, is that fair enough to say, or do you have a better way to say it?
That's correct. Right now we have an enterprise version, and it'll be going. We should have a standard version out here very soon as well, which would be, one user can build, and then we can go to an enterprise version, which could be any number of multiple users.
and CyberFire is often included in other people's products. For example, we're going to be including it with CIW. And so you work with many other providers to include it in other people's solutions, right?
Yeah, we have a channel that we support as well.
Yeah, and so thanks for that. Thanks for that question there, Lisa. Have you seen any other questions that people that have gone unanswered so far?
There's a couple more questions that are popping up.
Okay.
A question from David Kidd asking, how do you log into the virtual environment? Is it through a website? Is it through an application on your local PC?
Yeah, rather than having to go and tell people to download X software from, trial software that times out after 15 days or 30 days or whatever, yes, you go through, for example, with CIW products, you start with CIW Online, and then there are labs there, URLs there that will show you how Live Labs works. To get more detail on that answer, I'll turn the time over to Todd to give that answer. Todd, how about some specifics? Huh?
Yeah, in accessing these Live Labs, we've put it into our CIW Online services. And so as you go to get the online resources, the practice exams, the course mastery product that we have, those types of things, if you have the Live Labs, there's an option there to go ahead and log into that. Right now we have that with mostly our web design specialist and e-commerce courses, and that is that's the location you get to it. It gets integrated in. With our self-study product, that comes with that book and that curriculum and instructions on how to get to it. But it's log into CIW Online or whatever, in the case of some of our other partners, it's through their portal. When those are available, they click through, and we're working to make that an easier transition. And I think as we bring the CyberFire product on board, that will work very well. If you are familiar with CIW, there's several links that take you right to a specific module for questions.
Right.
In the future, our goal is to get that so you click on, there's a lab in Lesson 2 of Site Development Associate or Site Development Specialist, sorry, and you'll click on that. It'll take you right into the virtual environment so that you can perform those steps and those tasks assigned to that specific lab.
And I think that one of the questions was in foundations. Is it found in there? What we're looking to do is add, for example, a CyberFire environment to CIW foundations. That's not out yet, but it's forthcoming. Another question that was asked was how will impact virtualized teleworkers. Now, if Carlos is asking that, one of the answers I would give, if you are an instructor as a teleworker, right? If you are working remotely, it has a tremendous impact because those labs are now available to student and instructor alike. One of the things we haven't mentioned, by the way, is virtualized labs are terrific because you can ghost along your students. In other words, as Stephen and Todd and Art are my students, let's say, I can go in there and see their work. I can actually watch their work as they go, and I can see who's doing well and who's struggling and how to help them. So that's one thing that helps there. When it comes to virtualization and implementing a learning management system, yes, there are a lot of providers out there that will virtualize an entire learning management system as they go, and that's the usual product there. The other way in which we use virtualization with a learning management system is not only to create a learning management system environment that students can use, but from an LMS login, such as CIW Online, they can then access many resources. So we make our resources available, our PDF-based books, our practice exams, our extra resources such as quizzes, drag and drop, but also live labs available from our environment. What other questions are people coming up with, Lisa?
There's a question here about how virtualization will impact teleworkers. I'm not quite sure about the context of that question.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I grabbed that and said I think that teleworkers, if you're an instructor as a teleworker, virtualization works very well, because that way you still have a hands-on lab that's available to everybody, rather than having to, drag your meat space on in, your body on in, and meet people physically in a physical lab. This way you have a lab available. But as far as telecommuting virtualization, I'm not sure. Yeah, I understand. I'm not sure I can give much of an answer to that question yet.
Right. I think that's covered a lot of our current questions that are out there. There might be a few more that will come in.
Well, we got one in here, James, on virtualization. Is virtualization popular with implementing a learning management system?
Right, right.
And I think off of that, yeah, if you've got a learning management system that's obviously going to be running on a server, that could very easily be implemented within a virtual environment.
Tell me more about that, Stephen.
Well, for instance, if you're running a learning management system, Moodle or Blackboard or whatever, it has to be running from somewhere. It's either a cloud-based service or you're running it locally within your network, and so that's another network resource that you're having to take up. So that could very easily be implemented within a virtual server environment.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Can I jump in on that real quick, just as an example? The CIW Online portal that we use, the LMS that we utilize there, that is actually a virtualized environment. A couple of years ago, it used to be, here's one server in a data center, and away you go, and we hope nothing happens to it. Right now, what we have is the environment itself, the LMS, and many of the aspects of that are running on 2 physical different servers, and within each one they are virtualized twice, so that, as I talked about earlier, so that the downtime is minimized. So if one of the machines ever goes down, it automatically switches over to the other machine, one of the virtualized images there, and the redundancy keeps things functioning, and we eliminate a lot of downtime. So that's a good way to do this if you're supporting a lot of users, which we have quite a few users, both for our CIW products and other components. You need to make sure that these systems continue to function, and so that's one way of virtualizing that we live ourselves. So.
Very good. Right. There's another question that came up here. It's changing the subject. Is there any software that you folks have had problems running in a virtual OS? Usually I don't have problems with software running. I'll end up with problems sometimes where the virtualized environment doesn't work well with the hardware. But usually I can load most any software in there. But anybody had any problems with any particular operating systems? I virtualized Windows, Linux, and I think Mac systems. How about you guys?
Well, I think the purpose of the applications is that's one of the purposes of the virtual environment, James, is to simulate an actual running machine. So the application just sees it itself that it's running in a Windows box or a Mac box or a Linux box or on a server, dedicated server. So it's simulated that actual environment. So I don't think there's really too much problems with applications.
Yeah, I've never had any particular problem with any operating systems. The only time I've ever run into any issues at times is where if you have a Windows system or a Linux system and are running multiple IP addresses on them, sometimes you'll run in with network configuration issues. But with the operating system itself, it runs pretty well within a virtualized, within a VM, within a virtual machine. Sorry, Stephen, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I know. I was good. I was just going to add, I've heard of people running a virtual operating system just so that they could run a specific application.
Yes, in fact, there was an earlier question that had to do with what about legacy applications and older style applications that don't want to run particularly well in newer operating systems. And one of the reasons why, and I'm talking years ago, why virtualization was created was to make it so that people could support, companies could support old, tired applications, and it was much easier to say, look, I know everybody's using newer versions of operating systems, but we're going to run an old one in a virtual environment so that we can still support that old application. It was cheaper to do that. That was one of the reasons why virtualization was invented in the first place, was to provide legacy support for old applications. What's happened, fortunately for all of us, is we all realize that you can go for backwards compatibility if you want, but you could also do really newfangled, really cool things. And that's one reason why we're talking about it today. It has tremendous applicability throughout the classroom. Throughout the classroom today. Lisa, are there any other questions there, or any other comments folks want to come on in with?
I see a couple of newest questions here. I haven't had a chance to review them, trying to answer some pricing questions.
Cool. Yeah, as far as CIW and pricing, what we can do is put you in touch with a sales rep who can answer any of those questions. I see somebody here saying they are interested in setting up a virtual environment for a local high school to teach CIW courses, not an instructor. So congratulations on passing with 93.3%. That's great. What you can do is learn more about using live labs as an environment in your environment. I think that's something that you could really do. So what we can do is talk with you, Leslie, more about how to implement that. And Stephen, for example, could set up a time to discuss that with you. Stephen's very good at discussing implementation. Todd could too, for that matter. But thank you very much. We're getting near the top of the hour, and this may be a first, folks, that I might be ending a webinar on time. I mean, I didn't know that could happen. But I want to thank everybody for joining in today to learn more about CIW, but mostly about how virtualization works, the major players there, the practical uses. We've had Art Payne from CipherTax, who's been very, very helpful. And thank you so much, Todd and Stephen, for helping us talk more about virtualization. It was an absolute pleasure, as usual, to work with you on this. When it comes to following CIW, you can learn more about CIW on Twitter. You can learn more about us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and, of course, YouTube. And if you want to contact us, you can contact me, for example. There's my numbers, my email. You can contact Todd Hopkins and Stephen Schneider as well. Also, Terry Pinkston, our Vice President of Marketing. So I want to thank you all very much. And just so you know, as you download the slides, you'll notice they're much longer because I've put a bunch of material in there about what CIW is and how it makes it easy as an instructor or as a student to learn about the latest software and internet technologies.